Hi everyone. It's been a while, right? So I was listening to the latest episode of Hey Tablo podcast, and someone asked him like, "How can I improve my English?" Then he mentioned that actually your English is way better than you think, and at least 90% of it is fear. And I was like, "Oh my God, that is exactly what I've been thinking about for the past year." And to be honest, when I first came to the UK, I was really nervous about talking to native speakers, um, even though I had studied English for almost 20 years, right? But when I was speaking, I was always worried about, like, what if I made some basic grammar mistakes, or what if I sounded stupid, right? So I just kind of like avoided talking to those native speakers just to stay in my comfort zone at first. And then later, in one of my courses, I learned about a theory related to the second language acquisition called the monitor hypothesis. The moment I heard it, I was like, yes, that's what happens in my brain every time. So imagine you're trying to say something really simple, like let's say, I went to London yesterday. Okay, sounds easy, right? But then your brain starts doing this, like, wait, should it be go or went? Or like, did I pronounce that correctly? Or does this sound natural? Something like that, right? So you see, uh, before you've finished the sentence, you are already busy correcting yourself because your brain is trying to do at least two different jobs at the same time. One part of it is trying to communicate, and the other part is acting like an English teacher marking an exam paper, right? So maybe that's why we get stuck so often. And later, there's another theory I learned. It is called the affective filter hypothesis. Basically, it's what happens when you're nervous or worried about being judged. For example, you know a word, but the moment someone asks you a question, your brain suddenly goes blank, and 5 minutes later, you're walking down the street and you're like, oh my God, that was the word. You see, the more nervous you are, the harder it becomes to access the English you already know. Gradually, I realized something like people don't really care about perfect grammar or pronunciation at all. They're just trying to understand what you're saying. The goal of communication is communication itself, not perfection, right? So over time, I shifted my focus from like, am I speaking correctly to what am I actually trying to say? And I found the more I focused on the content, the more I forgot that I was speaking English. So I forced myself to speak more. And eventually I stopped translating everything from Chinese first. I just started like going directly from an idea to English. But of course, there's a side effect. Like sometimes I know exactly what an English word means, but I genuinely cannot remember how to translate it into Chinese. And I've previously shared how I use English podcasts to improve my English, right? But that was mostly about like input or let's say exposure. But now I want to talk more about output or let's say production. So what can you do when you've already like accumulated a certain amount of English but still struggle to speak fluently? First, ask yourself a question. What topic makes me forget I'm speaking English? Yes, maybe it's things like films, pets, K-pop, games, football, beauty, etc. For me, it's things like maybe films, music, and deep conversation. Uh, when I talk about these things, I just naturally become more fluent. For example, earlier this month, I was traveling with my friend, and I bought a postcard, and it's full of some deep questions. My friend and I suddenly had the idea of practicing our spoken English, so we started asking and answering those questions entirely in English. And at first, I was still thinking about my language, but then one question really hit me, and suddenly, all I cared about was just picturing the scene and answering that question. And before I realized it, I had been talking about like 10 minutes without stopping, I think. So personally, I truly believe this. The more you focus on a content, the more fluent you become. Or let's say, the more you forget about the fluency, the more fluent you become. Second, say it out loud. Write a journal, record yourself, make videos just like I do, and just start speaking. Of course, if possible, having real conversations is even better, right? So naturally, people ask, okay, what if I don't live abroad? And honestly, most of my daily conversations are not with native speakers either. So that's why I think AI can be really useful. Not because it's perfect, but because it can help you get into a real conversation with less anxiety, right? It won't judge you, and it's infinitely patient. But we've all heard that you could use AI to improve your spoken English, but how, right? Trust me. Simply saying like, help me improve my English, or like, talk to me in English is not very useful. If you don't know how to use a tool effectively, you are probably wasting a lot of its potential. So you need to know how to give AI effective prompts. Well, the first one, we call it request. So just like, instead of asking AI to correct you, ask it to request you. That's like, for example, imagine you're having a conversation with AI, and then I go to London yesterday, and then the AI might respond naturally, oh, so you went to London yesterday. See? Or like you say, do you want to play with me this weekend? And then the AI may respond, sure, I'd love to hang out this weekend. See, no interruption and no embarrassment. You just hear a more natural version. Well, second strategy, we can call it ask for clarification. That means like if you don't understand something, don't panic. Don't immediately switch to your first language, and don't give up on the conversation. Instead, learn how to tell people that you didn't understand. This is really important. For example, you can say, can you say that in another way? Can you explain that in a simpler English? Can you give me an example? Something like that. You see, because real conversations work like that. Yeah. By the way, it's totally okay to do this in like IELTS exam as well. So the goal is not to understand everything the first time. The goal is to keep the conversation going. And over time, you will get more comfortable explaining English in English instead of relying on your first language. And you might be surprised by how much you could actually understand. Last one, I call it track patterns, not mistakes. That means to not ask AI to correct every single mistake. Instead, you can ask it to track your recurring patterns. For example, maybe you keep mixing up tenses, or maybe you keep using the same basic vocabulary again and again. Ask the AI to remember those patterns. And then in your next conversation, even if you are talking about a completely different topic, ask the AI to keep paying attention to those same areas. That's how improvement becomes long-term rather than temporary. So yeah, maybe your English is already better than you think, and maybe the next step is not learning more English. Maybe the next step is finding something you genuinely want to say, and then learn how to keep the conversation going. Bye.